Basically, when I love someone's mission, I just want to help and be involved in whichever capacity.
Our featured guest today is an aerospace and electromechanical engineer who is passionate about systems, human systems above all. Stefan, thanks so much for joining us. I'm so excited to feature you today.
Likewise, I'm really excited to be here.
And we really appreciate you taking the opportunity to share from your journey. So, I was wondering, being an aerospace and electrical mechanical engineer, which came first? Like a curiosity about aerospace technology or more of a fascination with mechanics?
So ever since I was a kid, I've always loved building things. As a child, I started with woodworking, electrical projects, little piece of furniture, Lego. I was like creating things. Somehow the natural course of event led me to study engineering. And it started with being really good at math and sciences. And somehow the whole society was telling me I should capitalize on that and become an engineer. I wasn't the most passionate in high school and university. I was very passionate about everything until the age of 12, very curiosity driven. But then I had my first engineering role and it was kind of fun, but I also got really bored pretty quickly when I realized that it wasn't all about being inventive and creative and more about execution and just being in front of a computer all day. I discovered space and I thought space engineering might be different and might intellectually stimulate me. So yeah, that was the sequence of events, I would say. And only then I turned to the business world and realizing that there's a lot of creativity there and building organizations, having grand missions. And that's where I'm currently at as well.
That's excellent. I think, a lot of people can kind of relate, especially in this community, to the aspect of building things, right? That just innate curiosity of, I want to create, I want to build, I want to problem solve and troubleshoot. So I think it lends its hand well to entrepreneurship in the business world. Nancy mentioned earlier that you're particularly interested and passionate about human systems. Can you elaborate a little bit more on, human systems and what specifically is intriguing to you about them?
Yeah, this is a really interesting subject. So I'm a systems engineer by training, and I still remember my systems engineering professor at the time sharing during one of the first lectures in his thick German accent that systems engineering is everywhere, and you'll see once you leave university that you'll apply the mindset in anything you encounter. And funny enough, I keep thinking about him more and more the older I get, because I've always loved zooming in and zooming out in any system. So, for example, let's talk about the system of communication right now, right? Like we're together on this call and we're talking about a certain topic, which is its own system, and we have a community of people that's joining here, which is its own system and ecosystem. And the interrelations between everything and how it's all connected is somehow something that ultimately sparks a lot of joy and interest for me to understand that, sparks a lot of curiosity. So one system of all that I really love is simply the area of human systems, and specifically that applies to building teams. So for example, I come 4 years working at a startup where I built a sales team, a marketing team, customer success team, and an overall culture. So I really enjoy the process of idea and conception up to actual delivery of human systems, to say it like that. Like how can you make the glue somehow tangible and scalable and teachable in a business context. But this as well in my personal life. I think about community, I think about my closest friendships, partners, family, and more than anything in the last 6 months working out of burnout, about my relationship with myself. Because at the core of that system is the own rules by which I live, communicate, think that will impact how I connect with anything else in my life.
Making the glue that connects us tangible, the ways to think about that. I think that's like the entrepreneurial version of smelling the roses, if you will. I don't know. But I really like that analogy. And you were talking about zooming in and zooming out. How do you feel like you've sort of honed that ability for yourself? Because I think that that's something that a lot of us are always trying to master and not always easy.
Such a good question. I'm not sure how I've actively honed it. I think passively, the way I've honed it is being really, really curious about some very specific things that I need to get to the next step in my journey. So for example, one of the projects I worked on in the past was 3D printing in space. I thought that was really, really cool. Just the idea of being able to produce things in an environment in which it's really hard to get to, it's really hard to supply something if or when you need it. So like the big picture I thought was really interesting. That was part of my systems engineering master's as a space systems engineer. And at the time, I would have to think like really in depth, like a material science level, which materials we would use, how we would recycle them, what the impact of recycling on this material, and how might we reuse this, and how could a sustainable loop of manufacturing space look like. But I also had to think strategically, like big picture, why does this even make sense? Why would we go explore in these types of places? How could we solve our needs in different ways? And I like this multi-layered problem-solving approach in which you dive really deep on like a specific in-depth topic, but then also really high-level strategically looking at that. So my curiosity somehow happens in parallel on multiple layers. You can pick any system in life, whether that's, I don't know, for example, in front of me now I have a glass of water, and we can think about the function of me being hydrated during this call, making sure my voice is good. And we can think about how the glass was shaped and manufactured as a system. Or we can think about anthropology and how we got to actually build these recipients out of which we drink, right? And honing this skill, I'm not sure yet what my next step there is, but I feel it is something around disciplining my mind and becoming better at choosing on which layer I function at different times.
That's excellent. Very well stated. It can be tough to your point, tough to kind of pinpoint the reasons why, right? Or how we're able to kind of develop these skills. But it sounds like, a lot of it through your career has been through practice, right? And just really being curious about the projects you're working on and kind of out of necessity, right? I'd assume if you're, like you said, the example you gave about planning for 3D printing in space, you kind of have to think at all different levels, right? Because there's so many different complexities with that. So I'd assume that out of necessity, you're kind of having to think at different levels and taking a 10,000 foot view and then honing in on very specific details of it as well, which I think is super fascinating. And Nancy's point of great skill that kind of develops over time.
And I think what's interesting there is to also remind ourselves that at the end of the day, it's about exploring these different levels of abstraction, right? We're explorers at the core. When we decide to rethink a certain problem or a challenge, we're exploring all the layers at which we can, or perspectives we can look at the challenge. In that sense, I feel it's about finding continuous courage to be curious more than anything cutting the noise. Because as we're curious and we find more and more information, drawing the line and then being like, okay, what did I learn or what's actually important here and how do I move forward is probably the biggest challenge. Like prioritizing that and creating clarity. Because if not, it's just becoming a lot of noise. And we don't actually act and produce anything meaningful.
Absolutely. I love that you said that as well. I'm actually some work that I'm doing is kind of cutting through that as well, right? We're at a point where there's a lot of ideas floating around and a lot of places we could go, but there isn't a whole lot of action or focus on what actually needs to happen. And so I love that you kind of phrased it in that way of being focused on certain areas that are going to drive the needle, but at each level we're exploring. To that point, I think it's really interesting, and I'm assuming through a lot of your work, you've kind of had to collaborate and bring in other folks to, or other experts in the space to just understand a little bit more about problems, right? So, and I'm also assuming that kind of led to your curiosity of human systems, especially in org development, team development, right? And so, how do you create the team that's going to get the job done, the most effective and efficient team, right? And you're bringing in a human element there, which I think is absolutely fascinating and tough to navigate. So I'd love to hear a little bit more about kind of your perspective on just work you've done in developing teams or building organizations, especially when it comes to culture. Change management can be very hard to navigate. Would just love to hear a little bit more on that.
Yeah, I hear you. That's actually the key reason I jumped in it without also knowing too much about it. I was very curious to learn. And actually the MIT bootcamp I did 7 or 8 years ago on entrepreneurship was definitely the jumpstart to understanding how an organization works, because that 1 week where we basically emulated what it would look like to build an organization, it changed my heavy engineering perspective from optimizing for technology output for whatever reason to optimizing for solution output, which actually solved a certain problem. And somehow I was so surprised that this is not taught in engineering school, how to empathize, how to do market research, how to actually understand the problem better before you start coming up with the strongest technologically advanced solution you can come up with, because that's what you were taught in class. Found that working with young organizations, I love the whole process of early conception. As an example, in the last 4 years, I ended up then working at Valley Space, which is a software as a service company, which is essentially GitHub for hardware. At the time, I was the first hire in the commercial team, which was a team that didn't have a paying customer yet, didn't know how to sell, didn't know even what it was selling specifically, right? So in the first place, it was all about defining some of these and learning to sell, learning to package it, learning to find the right people who you're selling to, and then somehow reorganizing all this information to a way that you can hire someone and teach them this in a relatively short amount of time that they can also start producing results. So what I really enjoyed about it is having that overview effect and then seeing also the results with time. So you have a certain assumption, you run the experiment, and then you find out what worked and what didn't work. It sounds very clean now as I share it retroactively, but in the moment it was very messy and I felt like we had no idea what we were doing, to be honest. That being said, like about a year and a half or 2 years ago, we hit the 1 million ARR milestone, which for a SaaS company is like a big deal. And it felt really satisfying to look at what were the things that worked well, what kind of knowledge did we develop with time, because it's a really complicated, I think that's it, like the sales process, I think was core to design the teams around. And in the first place, we had to get to know the sales process. And that is something that is really exploratory. It's not, even if someone has a lot of experience in this space, coming into a new market, in a new industry, and you don't know the benchmarks, you don't know the personas, you don't know the value propositions, the competition, it's actually really hard. Of course, experience helps. But what I found more than anything was having kind of this high level goal in mind of what we're trying to achieve, and then somehow try and involve more and more people in the process is what gave like organic boosts to building the teams. But then at some point when you're big enough, I found that we really needed some sort of top-down approach as well, which was, okay, how do we now scale the teams beyond it? And that's when we start working with leadership coach, because that was the point in time in which we had a few people who were early hires that could become leaders, but none of us had ever like built a team that is ready to scale. None of us had ever built a team that's ready to go to the next phase of an organization's growth. Yeah, these growth pains were both quite challenging as well as really fun, I would say. But that was the point in time in which I noticed my own capacity for cutting through the noise and saying no and creating clarity for myself and my teams was challenged. And yeah, that's also around the time where I started burning out because I was just overwhelmed from a lot of the work over the years.
I really appreciate you, sharing those reflections, what your takeaways were, but also, kind of the culture that you work to establish while you're combining what I think of as like front end and back end jobs, and then creating a training program so that people can do it more seamlessly than you did. I can totally understand how that would lead to burnout. One of the questions we like to ask here that I feel like you almost delved into more specifically is, was there, a time during that process where you had to make a major pivot or deviated from the original plan? And how did you go about that? What did it teach you? And looking back, is there, something you might choose to change?
Great question. There's definitely many times in which we deviated from the plan. I can give an example that is very close to my heart. So after the first year of working in Valley Space, I really liked the idea of the founders to build a positioning conference, just like Salesforce did. And we really wanted to do it, but that's also exactly around the time where COVID was happening. And at the time, we also didn't have a big budget for it. So when COVID happened, even though we had built some initial momentum, we got some initial interest, we pivoted fully to doing it online. And we had a series of talks, which allowed us to then prototype it and see what we actually want to do with it before committing to something bigger. Funny enough, then it took us another 2 years to find the time and space and money to actually put together this conference. And even though I was not mentally in a great place anymore by the time I was building this conference, it was the last chapter of my time in Valley Space, we ended up building a fucking amazing conference that could not have been as good if we didn't have the unforeseen challenges in the beginning. It over-delivered. it exceeded, I think, anyone who was involved, their expectations in terms of speakers, content, attendance, the conversations that were created. Called Iteration 22, in case you're interested in checking it out. And it was the conference where we were bringing together essentially CTOs and the VPs of engineering of the organizations of the future, specifically for hardware. We let the CTOs and VPs of engineering of, for example, nuclear fusion companies speak with those of a flying taxi company, with those of the next level electric autonomous trucks, and so on and so on. So it's a very interesting moment in time, I find, to create conversations across industries and verticals, try and make everything a bit more human. So that's also, again, like the human system part. In the beginning, I would say the conference, we were looking at it very much as a way to position ourselves. And I would say by the end of it, I realized that it was all about creating the right conversations. From the initial idea up to the final conception, it took basically 3 years for me personally. And only after conference started realizing what were the actual valuable things there. And this is a pretty big pivot in the sense that we didn't really know what the success of that would look like. Like when you're making such a big time and money investment, of course, want to have certain KPIs or which you say, this is what success looks like. However, it's one big shot in the dark and you don't know what the response will be until you've actually done it. As much as you prototype it online, as much as you speak with people and everyone's interested and curious. So yeah, I think that was definitely an unforeseen circumstance, and I'm very happy by the way it turned out.
That's awesome and an amazing story. I was just, as you were speaking, looking up Iteration 22 online, and it looks like, to your point, an amazing group of just engineers, innovators, entrepreneurs as speakers. So amazing job, right, on the success of that. It looks like it's gone very well so far. You did mention something as you were chatting through, your last point of pivoting is you said before you kind of reached a burnout. And I think that's something that a lot of people get to a point of where they go, is it time to abandon this? I've kind of reached a critical mass here with myself. Would love to just learn more about kind of that period for you in so much that, like, at what point did you know that you had hit kind of your capacity and you were ready for a change? What did that look like? And how did you know that it was time to take time off? I know you took some time off just from work, and just curious to think about those steps, because I think that's something that everybody at some point asks themselves is this something I should continue doing? Should I take a break? Do I need to bring someone else in? So would love to get your thoughts on that process and just kind of your thoughts as you were going through that, because it's a tough decision to make.
Yeah, totally. Taking a time off the last 6 to 7 months has taught me that the reason I burnt out comes from way earlier. I've been in this cycle for the last 7 years, I would say, without realizing. And each time it would get worse and worse and worse. I think on average, I would have like little episodes each year or whatever, like starting new jobs, new studies, new relationships, new countries. And I think you can work through that with the right levels of awareness and methods and tools. However, at some point last year, I had already been feeling somehow undervalued in my team. I had not been feeling seen for my skills and what I could actually bring. I think that's also a typical challenge of an early hire when an organization is scaling. Like, I'm kind of a generalist, and then at some point you have to specialize, but I don't want to choose anything. I do get bored by repetitive things, and I think I might even be a little bit of a control freak because I like to have like an overview effect of how everything works together. I don't know, like working a lot of inner personal growth and development there. And the first signals that were really important to listen to were the body. And that was, I wasn't sleeping well anymore. I wasn't eating well. My cognitive skills started decreasing, trusting myself on my motorcycle, for example, or just like having scattered thoughts. Like a lot of these, when they start repeating themselves over the course of a few days, it's like, fine, you're going through maybe a temporary moment of exhaustion, you should take a break. A few weeks, for like, okay, there's something going on. If it's a few months, you realize, okay, there's like core fundamental things wrong here. And in my personal relationships, things were also not going well. So it's basically overextended in my personal relationships and my job. Typically, it's only starting to become visible when it's already pretty bad, in my opinion. But then the most important step is to admit to yourself that it's pretty bad. I think what I've seen in my own journey is that when I notice misalignment, I'm starting to think about creating change or acting, but then I don't commit to it. And that's a wasted opportunity. I think the faster we are comfortable with having those difficult conversations with ourselves and then everyone else who's involved, the faster we can react and, or rather respond and realign. Whether that's an internal realignment as to what we want or need in that moment, or external, making the world aware of that. That is very much connected with how we take up space, like how we dare to take a stance and share what's true for us, regardless of what the outcome might be on the other side. And in the first place with ourselves, I think it's really hard if like there's any ego involved, or if you have any strong like idea about your own identity and who you are or should be, and also externally what the expectations might be and being comfortable with disappointing people or maybe pissing someone off or whatever that might be. If you're going through rapid change and transformation, ultimately you will create a lot of friction. So yeah, I think it's a lot of things combined, but ultimately it's about making sure you're healthy. And if you're not healthy, if you feel like you have unhealthy patterns that you don't feel well in your body, ultimately they will get to your mind as well. Your decision making, your clarity, your creativity, your ability to connect with others, your ability to drive your business forward, to be able to say no and be that much clear and focus on your mission and to bring your vision forward. That's, in my opinion, what is actually needed. So in my case, I had definitely lost some of my personal ideas for what good looks like, what healthy looks like, and what a vision is that I stand by and live for myself, and then also in connection with that for others around me.
Thank you for your willingness to be vulnerable about noticing your own misalignment and then acting on it. Honestly, I can really relate personally to a lot of the symptoms you've described. But I think realizing your balance is off, as you said, is a difficult thing to do for oneself. I really liked your verbalization of thinking about how we take up space, analyzing your ideas about your own identity. I don't know about you, but personally, I feel like those have started pretty early in life for me. So I didn't even realize that maybe some of them were off. And I can definitely relate to what you're talking about as far as disappointing people. I agree with you that if you're not healthy, it ultimately really does take away from everything else you do. I'm glad that you're able to take that step away. Hi there. If you're enjoying this podcast, would you mind leaving us a review, a like, and subscribe on your favorite podcast platform? Thanks so much. That really helps our reach. The Founders Voyage podcast is now proudly sponsored by VidOps. Kane at VidOps has been taking care of our editing since early 2024. He works efficiently, and I'm sure you'll agree that he does a great job. Thank you to VidOps for helping bring this podcast to life. If you want the same great support we're getting for your podcast, or you need help with video, photography, or animation, you can get 10% off at vidops.io using our referral code Voyage. That's vidops.io, referral code Voyage. Now back to the show. How do you feel that you have, as you said, kind of more clear and focused on your mission? How do you see the next steps in your journey, either vaguely or specifically?
This is a very present topic for me right now. Connecting to what you said about taking up that space, it was a very big tipping point for me when in last summer I admitted to myself something's wrong. I'm going to have to take some time off. So I had decided that after the conference, I'm going to take like a few weeks off. And when I spoke with a psychiatrist for the first time in my life about what I'm feeling, what's happening, and I basically was like, okay, I think I need some time off. Could you prescribe that to me? It opened up a whole lot of things. And just admitting that to myself opened up a whole lot of things. And becoming aware that this is not just something I'm thinking about, it's actually real. And I need to invest time and energy in healing was just such a big tipping point. And then when you're, let's say, from a medical perspective, diagnosed with burnout and depression, you're typically told to get better as quickly as possible, to go on a journey of different types of therapy and different types of medical treatment. For me, that was quite like it felt like a punch in my face that I had to come to that point. And I think my ego and my pride was hurt. that all of a sudden I would have to take medication because my brain chemistry isn't doing well anymore, that seemed ridiculous. So I was like, holy shit. I've done all these things externally in my life, like, oh, I want to study space, so let me get another master's, or like, oh, I want to learn how to build companies, let me just do that. But somehow I never invested time and energy in finding out what gives me energy. How do I heal myself? What do I have that I can give to myself each day? So I basically started on this 6-month journey of asking myself the question, what gives me energy? I canceled everything and everyone. I crashed pretty hard the first few weeks. It was not easy, but I had decided to first try without antidepressants, so without sleeping pills, to simply regulate my body and my mind. With that came a whole journey of learnings. And I made myself my own project, which now has led me to a place in which I have a really hard time compromising on anything. And this is like a hell yes. Things just don't stick in my life right now, whether it's jobs or connections with people I meet. So going on this journey of asking myself what gives me energy is now also shaping the direction I want to take in terms of industries, jobs, missions. But connected with that is the system of support around these missions, right? Like, what are the things that I must have sufficient time or space for in order to be healthy and, let's say, wealthy in the mind for me to be able to push those grand ideas through? Because I realized that I love big, challenging goals. That just gives me so much excitement. And the spaces in which right now I feel most excited about, it's in the future of education, it is in the future of energy. It can be any tech, to be honest. It's like somehow connected to sustainability. I really care about working with different types of backgrounds at this point. I notice I'm now surrounded by a lot of artists, a lot of designers. I actually come from a family of artists. So a lot of the ways in which I found energy back was through creative expression. All of a sudden, I became a poet. I became a freestyle rapper. I started doing Qigong, which is like an old ancient Chinese method of healing yourself, which is like energy work essentially. And as much as my inner scientist was in conflict with some of these lines of thought in the past, I'm starting to witness how a lot of this work is extremely important. So now I have like healthy routines that keep me in check. And in line with that, little by little, I'm getting more clarity. So in the first place, I'm looking for really amazing people to work with, people who care about human connection, who care about the big picture, who care about results rather than routine, heavy process. With a good team, I believe, goes a grand mission, something that we actually care about. Because unless we do, at least for in my case, unless I do, it won't give me back the energy I put in it. Yeah, it's a very widespread, I would say, array of opportunities I'm looking into. In the last few weeks, I've started speaking with people. I'm only unemployed officially in the last 2 weeks. So it's been very short, but that part of identity is already shifting. There was a part of me I was like, oh no, but I've studied all these things. Like I should work as a space engineer or mechanical engineer, or now I was head of marketing. I should maybe just do that. But I've also done sales. I'm really good at it. I love it. Maybe I should do that. So there's all these like somehow externally influenced ideas around what I could or should do. But if I look at what gave me energy the last 6 months, it's probably some of those things as well, but they can come in the second stage. In the first stage, it's about what I believe in, right? It's my core values. Are they aligned with the people I work with? And the mission I pick, is that aligned with the core values I have? And then from there, I'm pretty much agnostic to the role itself. I love learning new things, which luckily for me as a superpower gives me a lot of freedom to do different things. But it's very hard to define this. I find myself that this is the first time I actually sit down with myself and try and answer this question in a way that's more sustainable than how it was when I was younger. And each 2 years in school, you would be asked, what do you want to be? And choose your studies accordingly. It felt very limiting, and my curiosity was definitely bummed out. So it feels like between the age of 12, like 11 and 31, for 20 years, I feel like my curiosity was being dampened. And always I was trying to get closer to finding out where it flows. And at this point in time, in the last 6 months, it's just like booming. I was basically trying to get bored and just take care of myself, my body. but the inspiration is like off the charts, unlike anything I ever had in my adult life.
That's amazing. Thank you so much for sharing. I do really love that introspection and that journey you went through to find more about yourself, what you enjoyed doing, right? And aspects of what you enjoyed doing. And I think, I personally can relate to that very well in that I have a varied background as well, right? And so, but I can find aspects of things that drive me in certainly different areas, in all different areas. And so to your point, it's kind of thinking through what are those, core values that drive you, not necessarily the job specifically, right? It could be marketing, it could be engineering, but really thinking about what of the aspects of those really drive you. And it sounds like you found a lot of that over the past 6-7 months of just taking a step back and taking some time off. And so I think that introspection is critical for everyone, right? To take some time and figure out what drives them, whether it's early on in life, whether it's mid-career, whether it's late career, it really doesn't matter. And certainly those things can change over time, but being aware of what motivates you, what drives you, and how you're able to take note of that and use that to help kind of drive you towards your next venture, your next idea, your next thought. So I think that's really, really an excellent thing for everyone to kind of think through. And I love that you were so willing to share that, because it's not always easy to your point, to admit to yourself that there may be a challenge and I may need to take some time back, or take a step back and take some time to think through it. I do want to shift gears a little bit here, only because I'm very curious about some of your work in aerospace. I would love to hear about some of the work you did with Valley Space and just in the aerospace industry. I know you were a guest lecturer for the International Space University. So if you wouldn't mind, I think that's a very fascinating area that I personally don't know a ton about, but would love to hear a little bit more about your work in the aerospace industry.
Yeah, happy to share. So interestingly, the reason I got into the space industry is because I saw a video when I was working as a 3D printing engineer of people trying to build a lunar base, a 3D printed lunar base. And I thought, what? Someone's trying to build on the moon with 3D printing? And at that point in time, I was 6 months into my first engineering job. And I was already kind of a little bored. So I was looking for inspiration. And like, oh, that would be so cool to like apply 3D printing to space engineering. So I went on this down the rabbit hole of how do I enter the space industry. And I discovered that I can actually just get a job, or maybe also do a second master's and learn about space, and maybe end up working with the people that I intended to work with, which was at the European Space Agency and the research teams there. That's actually exactly also around the time where I did the MIT bootcamp. So I took a very entrepreneurial approach to that, and managed to meet all the people and align my studies with the job and do research. And I ended up working actually at the European Space Agency's human space exploration department. So essentially working with astronauts on future lunar exploration specifically. So my team was an innovation team, and we were designing different types of technology that you may need if you wanted to inhabit the moon. For example, if you would build a lunar village of, for example, a few buildings, you would need infrastructure, so power grids. We would do different projects and research on power generation, storage, and distribution. You would need food and water. We would do different projects around growing food in space, recycling bio-waste, recycling water, extracting water from the locally available resources, because actually the lunar soil has some water in there. We would do projects around inspecting those resources. So it's called regolith. The lunar soil is basically sand, it's basaltic rock. And in a lot of places on Earth, you have similar to almost the same physical and chemical composition as what you can find on the moon. So this allowed us to basically identify similar soil and then do experiments with that to process it, whether it's extracting resources, oxygen or water, or 3D printing with it, processing it in different ways is something we did a lot. We did a lot of robotics research, how humans and robots can collaborate in certain types of missions, which is very procedural as well, because it's less technology development and more how does this actually work in practical terms, and so on and so on. Like there's a million things you can think of what you may need if you live on the moon. And it was really cool. My job was specifically 3D printing for spare parts and tools, when you don't have everything available or you don't need to bring everything with you, and how we can recycle materials locally. So that was a job that gave me a big overview effect on sustainability, I would say, because you're basically trying to create a sustainable habitat, except it's on the moon, it's not on Earth. I have to say, as inspiring as it was to work with astronauts and as inspiring as it was to work at the European Space Agency, in a lot of ways, it was not a place for a young person. It's a very heavy organization, it's very political, and ultimately, the organization as a whole, similar to any big administrative organization, doesn't have an aligned vision that everyone can riff off, let's say. And because of that, everything moved quite slowly. And as someone who was 26, 27 at the time, I did feel like I could not stay there longer than the 2-3 years I stayed. I stayed almost 3 years in total. And that's when the startup world was pulling me. And I was like, okay, I think I want to work at a startup or I want to build a startup. And I think I would like to be in the space industry, but I would love to also explore other industries. And Valley Space was the perfect fit. They gave me a shot at my first official business role because I had volunteered in a lot of ways at hackathons, startup weekends, advising some founders on the side. Just that gave me a lot of energy, and I loved it because I love the whole how do we create an idea or how do you turn an idea into a commercial venture. So yeah, at Valley Space, it was a very interesting market because offering a software that allows you to basically streamline your engineering process. Like in the software industry, GitHub has done wonders in the last, 15, 20 years now. Software developers have great ways of collaborating, reusing code, being able to, in very smart ways, test and validate. In the hardware world, a lot of it is still very old school. I would say that most data in the hardware world today are still residing in a lot of Excel sheets and PDF files. And just like in any industry, the database solutions have a big advantage over all the others. So that's what Voyage was offering. It was extremely hard to sell into the market that we're selling into. Basically, we're helping, in the beginning, space systems engineers building satellites, having a more efficient design process. And then from there, we start realizing which other industries we could serve with that. So from space, went into aeronautics, went to automotive. One of my 6-month projects was I joined a healthcare innovation program with GE Healthcare to try and open the medical market for medical devices. The energy sector became really big. We had nuclear fusion reactor customers. So it was really interesting to see how the things I've learned in the space industry became applicable to so many other industries and how transferable some of these lessons are and how these different industries actually want to learn from each other. I would say that at this point in time, my interest from, let's say, space inspiration has shifted way more to terrestrial innovation and sustainability. However, I still see very much a connection there. I'm not entirely sure yet where it will lead me, but it's definitely been a beautiful journey of learning.
Yeah, thanks for kind of helping us connect kind of the constellation of your journey too, and some of the transitions that you've taken and into. I mean, you kind of answered my question about how how you came into Valley Space, and also I just want to point out too, you have a couple comments from people on the questions and discussion channel, just really thanking you for being so vulnerable. And Andrew also shared that he has a friend at Icon in Texas, 3D printing houses if you're interested in connecting later on. I think it's really neat that you've used your skill set in an advisory capacity, and seeing byways to come up. I was like, oh, it's been so long since I connected with Tommaso. It feels like forever. I was sort of wondering if you might tell us a little bit about that. I'm assuming it's been kind of a rewarding experience. I'd love to hear what sort of motivated you to take on your first advisory role.
Yeah, it's a very good question. Actually, throughout my time at Velasquez, at some point, I felt like I really wanted to get involved with other teams and help out where I can, pro bono, usually. Done only a few paid consulting gigs and discussed some other ways of incentivizing me to stay on board. With Tommaso specifically, it was a very interesting one because I saw a program here locally in Lisbon being opened calling for startups that work in e-waste. I had just met him, I think, the year before in the Netherlands, or I don't remember exactly where. I think the first time I met was in the Netherlands. think I was already living in Cologne at the time in Germany. I just love the mission. I've always found e-waste such a big problem, given how consumer technology and the whole market of electronics is moving and scaling. So that seemed like a natural course of events to start working on the sustainability side there. And loving the mission, basically when I love someone's mission, I just want to help and be involved in whichever capacity. So when I saw this program being launched here locally, I saw that the competition was up and running. They seemed like the perfect fit. And Tomas actually came down at the time, got involved. I believe they won actually one of the awards for that competition. And they're now pushing a pilot project. So I'm currently not, I think in the last year or so, we've barely spoken. I haven't been involved in any way. But at the same time, I'm a huge supporter, and I checked in with him a few weeks ago. I'm super excited about the project because I find in any way, whoever's working on hardware is already challenging, right? Because you're in the hardware world. There's usually a bit more logistics and supply chain questions to be answered there. And then second of all, if it's in the sustainability space, the economics of it are usually not clear yet, given that we don't reward that in our current economy that well. So it implies creativity on two extra layers that excite me. So yeah, that's why it sparked energy, sparked joy, and I think Tomas is an absolutely amazing guy. And yeah, really enjoyed all the touch points we've had.
That's amazing. I love that you just wanted to get involved, right? And just that curiosity and enjoyment in helping others, or at least helping with projects that you see value and are passionate about. I think that's an excellent way to go about it and can lead to some amazing opportunities. So that's incredible. Thank you for sharing. I think that's awesome. I have done some advisory a little bit similar pro bono, and I've always had a great time with it. It's always been fun because it's always something that I'm kind of passionate about or a project that I'm interested in. So I think that's a great way to get started down that path. As we wrap up, we're coming kind of to the end of the session. One question we always close with, same one, and I'd love to kind of get your thoughts. So the question we always close with is, what do you think has been the biggest lesson or the best lesson or takeaway from your journey so far? And what words of wisdom would you like to leave us with as a community? So it could be, a mantra, something personal to you, or just, ways of thinking about things differently, or any words that you may want to share as a closing thought.
The first thing that came to mind just now when you said that is take radical action. I find that oftentimes we have all the right ideas. We can stay in the head, intellectualize all we want. And many of us, especially me, I would say in the last years, I've had clarity come up over and over and I didn't take action. When you don't, it bites you in the ass. So that's the first one. And then connected with that is follow your flow. What gives you energy? What feels like flow? Anyone who studied flow states or is an artist or snowboards or I don't know, whatever gets in flow. I'm a surfer. In my poetry, I feel flow. In certain conversations, I feel flow. Yeah, the second one is just follow the energy. And if something doesn't give energy, just don't do it. It sounds very simple. Yeah, somehow I wish I had known this better. And the third one is take care of yourself in the here and now. Like whatever your needs are, whether it's sleeping more or aligning one of your most important relationships in your life or eating better, just take care of yourself. When you do that, things start unfolding beautifully. And in the process, being patient is definitely one of my hardest ones that I had to learn. But yeah, being patient has been a forced lesson on me and currently almost a mantra. That's something I will leave you guys with.
I appreciate your wrap-up note too about taking care of yourself, and kind of the rest will follow. I think you gave us several good points there, but I really take that to heart.
Can I add one more, which is kind of meta?
Absolutely.
Use your voice. Like the fact that you're creating this conversation, the community discussion, the community voice. I find that in the past, I did not use my voice. I did not dare to share as authentically what is true for me. At the core of everything else, about listening to that inner voice, not being afraid for whatever other people might think or say. And the more we do it, the more confident we get to take care of ourselves because we have to speak up, to take the time to be patient, and so just express ourselves.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate you sharing so much of yourself personally, and your professional journey with us today. It's a pleasure that we've gotten to have these sorts of conversations over the past 3 years in this community. And I think it's the best thing is when people are completely themselves, and do share some of the vulnerable parts of their journey. So I really, really do appreciate that. And I can't thank you enough.
Thank you for sharing. I feel a lot of appreciation for being here, and I feel a lot of appreciation that I was invited by you and introduced by Andrew. Also seeing Dorian here and him sharing about his PhD and that he's currently wanting to take some time off. And like having a friend in the room always feels great. So I feel somehow a lot of support, even though it's the first time I have a touch point with this community. Yeah, if anyone has any follow-up questions or ideas or thoughts, or maybe some of the more vulnerable things I shared feel like topics you may want to dive deeper on, or you have a cool idea or business opportunity for me, I'm open to anything. This is the first time in my life in which I feel a lot of freedom. I feel very grateful to be given this space to then use that freedom to share my journey. So thank you for that, Nancy. And thank you, Matt and Nancy, for hosting. You guys have been wonderful to speak with.
And we'll definitely have to make sure we connect you with Spencer, who's usually here every week too. An engineer who also shares your passion for human systems, I should say.
That sounds exciting.
Yeah, thank you so much again. And we'll definitely continue to connect. Thank you so much again. And thanks everyone for making time to join us. And we look forward to having you join us in following weeks. Please feel free to nominate other people that you'd love to hear share their journey. Thanks so much, everyone. I hope you have a great day and evening ahead.
Thank you so much. Have a beautiful day.
Take care.
You've just finished another episode of Founders Voyage, the podcast for entrepreneurs by entrepreneurs. The team at Founders Voyage wants to thank you from the bottom of our hearts. We hope you enjoyed your time with us, and if so, please share this with someone else who might enjoy this podcast. You can also support us by leaving a review on Apple Podcasts and Spotify, and by donating to our Patreon. Outro music today is Something for Nothing by Reverend Peyton's Big Damn Band.